On our broadcast tonight, the salute to the warriors who stormed the beaches here in Normandy, the men who liberated a nation and changed the course of history. Tonight, the emotional return for many one more time. Our NBC News exclusive, our conversation with President Obama on the prisoner swap, his reaction to Edward Snowden, and what he told us shortly before a surprise meeting with Vladimir Putin. Moment of crisis, a terrifying scene today. A heavily armed gunman opens fire. Tonight, the shootout, a hail of bullets at a courthouse outside Atlanta. And run for history. Excitement building at Belmont after all these years. Are we about to witness a triple crown? Nightly news from Normandy tonight begins now.
This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from Normandy.
Good evening. When they were young, on a terrible, dank day, 70 years ago today, they dropped into the woods in parachutes. They flew overhead in warplanes, and wave after wave of them ran onto the beach, despite withering German machine gun and artillery fire raining down on them from above. It was an enormous gamble. They paid a staggering price. Just under 10,000 souls rest in eternal peace here behind us, some of them right where they died. Yet their efforts turned the tide in the war and helped to save the world. It was a beautiful day here today, made more beautiful by how many of them made it back. One more trip to Normandy for the men who already took it once. Years ago, Tom Brokaw gave the whole bunch of them the perfect title, The Greatest Generation. Here today, Tom was back as well to witness this 70th reunion.
This is why we're here. Here above the beaches of Normandy, just beyond the water, that brought liberty at a great sacrifice. For those who survived that day, and for so many others, this is a journey of honor and remembrance, to honor their fallen friends and remember 70 years later. But it is not just the veterans who honor the sacrifices here. A new generation of leaders takes up the call.
We tell this story for the old soldiers who pulled themselves a little straighter today to salute brothers who never made it home. We tell the story for the daughter who clutches a faded photo of her father, forever young. Gentlemen, I want each of you to know that your legacy is in good hands.
And the president reminded us that their legacy goes beyond the fighting to the costly time in their young lives.
They left home barely more than boys, returned home heroes. But to their great credit, that is not how this generation carried itself. After the war, some put away their medals, were quiet about their service, moved on.
But before they could go home, there was Normandy. There had never been anything like it before, and there never would be again.
What more powerful manifestation of America's commitment to human freedom than the sight of wave after wave after wave of young men boarding those boats to liberate people they had never met?
And a command from the commander-in-chief.
Whenever the world makes you cynical, stop and think of these men. Whenever you lose hope, stop and think of these men.
Now, in their late 80s and 90s, so many of these veterans will not be around for the 75th anniversary. Their lives are coming to a close, but their legacy can never be dimmed.
An incredible day here at Normandy. And Tom, whether you accept it or not, you get their thanks for naming their entire generation. And I know it's personal for you to be back here with them.
It is, but the original intention was to write a book about them, for them. And what has been so gratifying, of course, is that generations of Americans have picked it up. What's striking to me as well, Brian, is that so many people are more interested in World War II now than they would have been 40 years ago. And I think it was the magnitude of the event and the unity of the country at that time as opposed to where we are in the world now.
Great to have you back here. What a day here on the coast above Omaha Beach. President Obama sat down with us for an exclusive interview at a time when things military happened to dominate the news. Chiefly, Bo Bergdahl, the U.S. Army sergeant, coming home to the U.S. after years behind enemy lines in exchange for those 5 prisoners from Guantanamo Bay. On the subject of Bo Bergdahl, there is real confusion, and we're hoping you can clear up this one point that arose last night and today. What was the reason for not informing the 8 members of Congress who would customarily be informed by this?
Brian, I have to tell you the same thing that I've been saying for the last several days, which is we have a rule, a principle, that when somebody wears our country's uniform and they're in a war theater and they're captured, we're going to do everything we can to bring them home. And we saw an opportunity and we took it. And I make no apologies for it. It was a unanimous decision among my principals in my government, and a view that was shared by the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And this is something that I would do again, and I will continue to do wherever I have an opportunity if I have a member of our military who's in captivity. We're going to try to get him out.
The reason for the lack of congressional communication?
As I said before, the main concern is that we had to act fast in a delicate situation that required no publicity.
The 5 prisoners, part of the exchange, by their resumes, they're professionals, former high-value assets. The question asked on the cover of Time magazine this week, was it worth it?
The fact is that we are ending a war in Afghanistan. We have released, both under my administration and previous administrations, a large number of former Taliban fighters, some of whom returned to the battlefield. But by definition, you don't do prisoner exchanges with your friends. You do them with your enemies.
In our interview recently with Edward Snowden in Russia, I raised the allegation, the charge that he has badly damaged his country. How has the United States been harmed by what he did?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the particulars of the case. I will say that the disclosures that we've seen had a very significant impact on our intelligence operations around the world, had a grave impact on a number of our diplomatic relationships, compromised our ability to gain insight into some of the work that our adversaries do. I've said before, and I'll say again, there's no doubt that this is an area of legitimate debate. And I think there are patriots on both sides who recognize, on the one hand, we've got to make sure that our eyes and ears are open for potential threats. What's also true is we've got to make sure not only that our privacy is protected, but that the manner in which our intelligence services operate internationally comports with our values and our ideals.
Your personal connection, it's quite a distinction to be able to say that a family member fought in Patton's Third Army.
Well, you know, my grandfather was the first to be very humble about his service. He came in after the initial charge. You know, these men who were so young when they came here, and showed such extraordinary courage and capacity and change the world, and then go back home and settle back down and didn't really make a fuss about it. You know, my grandfather passed away over 20 years ago. This is one of those days where I thought to myself, it would have been nice to have him here. I think he would have been proud to see that what he was a part of so long ago was now being celebrated by a grandson who is the commander-in-chief of the greatest military on earth. I think he would have been pretty proud and probably more than a little surprised.
Part of our conversation with the president here today, and as he left us and boarded his helicopter Marine One, we noticed someone with him Turns out he offered a D-Day veteran a better-than-average view of the French coastline from above. 90-year-old retired Command Sergeant Major Kenneth Rock Merritt first came to these shores with the Army's 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment 70 years ago today. And we sincerely hope you can join us tonight for our hour-long special profiling 4 D-Day veterans who came back here, 2 of them for the first time since 1944. It airs tonight at 8, 7 Central on this NBC station. President Obama today thanked the French for the beauty and dignity and remembrance of this resting place. And back home in the U.S., France gave its thanks in another way for America's help in World War II. In New York Harbor today, 3 helicopters dropped 1 million rose petals on the Statue of Liberty, which, of course, was a gift of friendship from France to the United States originally. World War II veterans and active duty military members were among those on hand for the event. We'll take a break here. More of the day's other news still ahead when we continue, including a heavily armed gunman on the attack, a terrible shootout at a courthouse outside Atlanta. A wounded sheriff's deputy in Georgia is being praised tonight for preventing a bad situation from becoming much worse. The deputy was shot during a confrontation with a heavily armed man who was due at the Forsyth County Courthouse for a hearing, but had a much different plan. We get our report tonight from NBC's Mark Potter.
Police say the shooting began at 10 o'clock this morning when 48-year-old Dennis Ronald Marks drove his SUV to the steps of the county courthouse in Cumming, Georgia, where he threw gas and smoke bombs and then tried to run over and exchange gunfire with a sheriff's deputy.
Backside of City Hall next to the courthouse.
The deputy was shot in the leg. Moments later, other police arrived, opening up with a barrage of gunfire, killing Marks.
The only way I can describe it is in a frontal assault on our courthouse. Mr. Marks' intention was to get in that front door and take hostages.
A former attorney says Marks was due in court today for a plea deal on drug and weapon charges, but was angry over the agreement. He never showed up before Judge Jeffrey Bagley, who later heard the shots outside.
I went down and got down off my chair onto the floor, and I was quickly escorted from the bench.
Police are investigating whether Marks, who was no stranger to authorities, was a member of an anti-government group. The sheriff credits the wounded deputy with saving countless lives by confronting the gunman, keeping him outside the courthouse. Mark Potter, NBC News, Miami.
And an update tonight on 2 other acts of violence we've been following since last night. In Seattle, police said more people would likely have been killed by a gunman at Seattle Pacific University had it not been for a brave student who rushed in to help. After 1 student was killed, 3 others wounded. A 22-year-old engineering student fired pepper spray at the suspect, then tackled him. Today he was praised for his heroics. And police in Canada arrested a 24-year-old man early today after the shooting death of 3 Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the province of New Brunswick, just north of Maine. The suspect in this was found in a backyard. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. We are back in just a moment with a champion who is perhaps on the cusp of history. There was more positive economic news today. We learned the U.S. economy added 217,000 jobs last month. Economists say it's the 4th month in a row now of solid hiring and a good sign for the still sluggish U.S. economy. The unemployment rate was unchanged at 6.3%. It has been 36 years since we've seen a champion claim one of the biggest crowns in sports. But that could change tomorrow at Belmont Park, where a Cinderella story is on the verge, perhaps, of history. NBC's Katie Tur is at the track in New York tonight. Katie, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. He comes from a place that winning horses don't. His dad was a race loser. His mom, people said you'd be crazy to buy, but somehow they had California Chrome. And in May, the colt took the Kentucky Derby. 2 weeks later, the Preakness. Tomorrow, he'll race for the Belmont Stakes and what could be the first Triple Crown since 1978. And though the odds are overwhelmingly on his side, it's not going to be easy. That's because Belmont is big. At 1.5 miles, it's longer than both the Preakness and the Derby. In the last 12 years, 4 horses have seen their crown hopes crushed here. In short, it's a place where legends are made, and Brian, all too often, dreams are dashed.
Katie Turret, trackside Belmont Park. We all get to find out tomorrow. Katie, thanks. And when we come back from here, one of the great stories among the great men who gathered here today. Back here tonight at this magnificent resting place, the veterans who have come back for this 70th have been extraordinary. Like all members of their generation, their bravery as young men is equaled only by their modesty now. In our hour-long special later tonight, we follow 4 of them back here, including a man who survived his worst day to live a long life and prosper back home. Tommy McDonald stormed Omaha Beach when he was 21, not thinking about how the day would live in history. But now, at 91, he does not want his experience to be forgotten.
I want my boys to see where it all happened.
He returned this week with 2 generations at his side. His grandson, Matt Alexander, is an Iraq War veteran.
I felt like I really needed to see this, to put it all into perspective, and it really has changed my perspective of what my granddad went through.
McDonald was a sharpshooter with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red 1. Their mission was to take Omaha Beach, Bloody Omaha, where the famous scene in Saving Private Ryan captured the epic bloodshed and violence of that morning. Few of McDonald's friends survived, and on his way up the beach, a piece of shrapnel pierced his hip. How does it feel to get hit, first of all?
It was red hot. It was like somebody hit me with a hot poker, but it didn't hurt.
Oh, come on.
Well, it might hurt a little bit, but I could still move.
McDonald served through the end of the war. The Army wanted him to stay on, but he had had enough.
I said, I've done all the killing I'm going to do. I'm going to go to medical school, become a doctor, and start saving lives instead of taking them.
Back home, Tommy McDonald became known as Dr. Tommy, an obstetrician. He delivered nearly 5,000 babies in his career and had 8 of his own with his late wife, Ann. But for years, the war stayed with him. For the first time, McDonald visited the cemetery and friends who never made it home.
We all gave some. They gave all.
This journey back to Normandy was about closing a chapter for McDonald, and with the help of his family, ensuring what happened on this stretch of coastline will be remembered for generations to come.
It's a great honor to be able to see the people respect what was done.
Isn't that the most important thing, to pass along the lesson of what your effort made?
And they understand. It's a wonderful thing for them to understand.
He's one of the reasons we ask that you please join us for tonight's special hour. We urge you to watch if you can as a family. It's a generational lesson, really, in bravery and modesty. Return to D-Day with us and with these 4 men who helped save the world when they were young. That is our broadcast on a Friday night and for this week. Thank you for being here with us. I'm Brian Williams, reporting tonight from the U.S. Military Cemetery here at Omaha Beach. We hope to see you back home in New York on Monday night. In the meantime, have a good weekend. Good night from Normandy.